Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Grace Covenant Chats. I am your host, Caleb Watt, here with my fantastic co-host, as usual, Pastor Doug. P. Doug, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Caleb. How about yourself?
I'm fantastic. We were just having a fantastic conversation. It was quite humorous. But anyways, would you like to intro the topic for today?
Yeah, of course. So this past Sunday, we had a message on trust. We're in the series Miracles of Jesus, and we looked at the healing of the official son in John chapter 4. And sort of the main idea that we talked about in that message was that this man, this official, like you can see his trust in Jesus growing throughout the story, where he first believes in the word that Jesus says, and then later, upon seeing that his son is healed, he believes in Jesus. So he believes in the word, and then he believes in Jesus himself. So like there's this entrusting that is happening, this growing trust. And I talked about how like that's what our lives should demonstrate, this growing trust in Jesus. But let me ask you this, Caleb, is that easy to do? Like just snap your fingers?
The number of times I thought about like, how do I trust God? Like I even read, I remember like 2 years ago, like a book by Jerry Bridges, like trusting God even when life hurts or whatever. And it's like, trust God. I'm like, what does that even mean? Well, it sounds great on paper, but like it's really hard to like, I guess on like several levels, right? It's like on one level, hard to do, right? Practically. But then on another level, it's like, how do I get that into my heart? Right? Because it's like I can do practical things and it's helpful, which I suppose that's one of the things that we wanted to talk about, right? But like that's helpful, but like how do I get that to sink into my heart? How do I change the disposition of my heart from like always holding God at arm's length to like trusting Him, right? So very, very difficult to do.
Just let go and let God.
Just believe.
Simple.
Just believe. Easy.
There's a funny Mad TV sketch where this woman meets with this like a psychiatrist, and his answer to her for all her problems is, "Stop it, stop it." And for some of us, when we hear a message on trust, that's what we may hear. We may feel like we're just being told, "Well, just trust." But how, right? How do we do that? And that's what I'm hoping that we can talk about a little bit more in this session today.
Then how do we do it, P. Doug?
Oh, great question.
Shoot.
Let's cut to commercial now.
Commercial break.
No, but actually, I think Jesus gives us some pretty concrete ways in which we can actually grow in our trust in Him. Everyone, I think our church knows I love the Sermon on the Mount, because the Sermon on the Mount is Jesus's like one of his greatest messages on what it means to follow Him and live in the kingdom. And I think for a lot of us, when we think about like trusting Jesus, one of the verses that often pops in our minds is Matthew 6:33, where it says, seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things will be added to you as well. This idea, if you seek Jesus first, seek His kingdom, like you can trust that you'll be taken care of along the way. And again, we can read that and think, okay, that sounds good, but like, how do I actually do that? And as I mentioned, the Sermon on the Mount is this great picture of kingdom life. And so thankfully, Jesus gives us clues on how we're supposed to do that, because that verse, Matthew 6:33, is preceded by this section where Jesus talks about what it means to practice the kingdom, like to practice kingdom life or to practice righteousness, as he says. Like in the very beginning of Matthew chapter 6, he says, "Beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them, for then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven." And so his idea here is that, there's ways that we can practice our kingdom righteousness, practice kingdom life. And he goes through those to make sure that we're doing them with the right heart. Ultimately, the heart being trusting Jesus, not trusting ourselves to look good, so others will applaud us for doing these things. But the three practices that Jesus explicitly goes through in this section, I think are great practices on building our own trust. And those practices are giving, right? Jesus first talks about how we should give like in secret. And then prayer. Jesus talks about praying, and he gives us the Lord's Prayer ultimately as the blueprint for how we can pray with kingdom language. And then he ends that with fasting. That's the third practice. So we see giving, prayer, and fasting. And then immediately this chapter is followed with Jesus talking about how we should lay up our treasures in heaven, right? Seek heavenly sort of rewards, don't seek earthly rewards. And then ultimately he says, do not be anxious, right? Trust me, like don't worry about these different things. Don't worry about what to eat or what you wear. Like God will provide. And then, then we come to that verse. But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. And so I think what Jesus is trying to say is that if we practice these three things, right? Giving, prayer, fasting, those are ways we can grow in our trust.
So then do you see like each one of those like exercising like a different facet of trust? Or do you feel like they're like somehow like all under this like collective umbrella that where if like you do one, then you'll like you'll find it easier to grow in like the other or something like that?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I don't think it's accidental that Jesus chose these three practices to talk about here in the Sermon on the Mount, because I think these three practices push us to trust God in certain core areas of our lives. Giving, what is that? Obviously, that's trusting Jesus with our finances, because when we give of our own resources, we're saying, we're acknowledging this is not mine to hoard, to keep for myself. I give it unto you, Lord, to use as you will, right? Giving is a way that we can express that we trust Jesus, even with our finances. Prayer is saying that we trust God with our time, because it takes time to pray, and also saying we trust God with what's on our mind, like what's worrying us, right? Because prayer is a reflection of what's on our hearts and giving it up to God. And so that's trusting God then with what's sort of on our mind, what's weighing us down. And then lastly, fasting is trusting God with our energy, because we need food to eat. And even if we're like worn out and tired because we're fasting, we're saying, no, Lord, you are greater than even this food, the energy that it gives. You are worth more. And I think those three things are core areas of our lives, right? Our money, our time, what's sort of our worries, and our food and our energy, right? Those are critical things. And if we're able to practice these things, it's going to push us to trust Jesus more in those core areas of our lives.
So then I feel like the next question that I would have like along the lines of that is like, is there, I want to say like a proper way to do each one of these things, right? Because my mind goes to, is it like 2 Corinthians 8 where Paul's like talks about God loves a cheerful giver, and then like you have again like the example that you brought up, like Jesus with the Sermon on the Mount, giving like the example of the Lord's Prayer, but then like also all these commands, and like I think like even John 15 is like abide in me, right? And then I will give you what you pray for. So then there's like almost like, oh, am I supposed to pray a certain way, or is there a certain way where I pray it's more powerful, more effective? And even with fasting, right? Like I think in today's world, right, we have certain connotations associated with fasting, or like, is this, or do I have the capacity, like physical capacity to fast, or do I need to be in a certain place? Do I need to prepare myself for a fast? So it's like, I feel like both biblically and like, I don't want to say as a product of the 21st century or like whatever, because it's like, maybe we should sacrifice those to God. But like even in today's context, right, there are like practical implications for each one of these. So is there like a proper way to approach them, or to start learning how to do each one of these practices?
Well, sometimes we can get so caught up with how that we just don't actually do it. And so I think that for those of us who aren't doing any of these things, giving, fasting, praying, the best thing to do is just start. And then to see how that grows our own muscles, right? Because giving is a muscle that we need to grow. Our ability to give expands as we just do it. Our ability to pray expands as we do it. Our ability to fast expands as we do it. And so sometimes we can get so caught up in like how that we just don't even start. Obviously, there's certain guidelines and parameters we want to put in place to make sure that we do it well. And Jesus actually even talks about many of those things here in Matthew 6, right? Don't give, as like in a showy way to like let others think, oh, this person's so generous. Don't pray in front of others to make people think you're so holy. Don't fast so other people think you're so like righteous by that, And so obviously that's one thing. We're supposed to do these things in secret for the Lord. But ultimately, like, we just got to start doing those things, right? Just start giving. Some people get caught up, oh, am I supposed to give to the church or give to like another organization? And I mean, obviously I have lots of thoughts about that, but if you're not giving at all, just start giving first, right? That's just my first heart. Just start giving first. Don't worry about that yet. We can grow in those areas. If you don't know how to pray, Jesus gives us a model, the Lord's Prayer. And I think really that's a great prayer. And I think it's not by accident that's sort of in the center of this chapter. And really, this is the center of the Lord of the whole Sermon on the Mount, is this prayer. Because if there's one way to really express that we trust Jesus, we trust his kingdom, and we want to see it come in our lives, if we just pray the Lord's Prayer like regularly, I think that will change our hearts and our minds. And so I'm encouraged everyone, like, make that a habit to pray the Lord's Prayer, because it's like the prayer Jesus gave us. So why do we feel like we have to come up with our own words? Like, some people are like, I don't know how to pray. I don't know how the right words. Well, pray the Lord's Prayer. Jesus said, pray like this. And so that's a great way to grow our trust and to grow our prayer muscles. And then fasting, it can start small. It can start with just maybe fasting one meal. Just once a week, just fast one meal, like lunchtime. Just, instead of going out to eat, going out to lunch, just stay home and just fast that meal. Maybe spend some time praying even during that time, or maybe journal during that time. But this is a way just to get away from the craziness of life and just to tell Jesus that he is more important, because that's what these practices do. They teach us to sort of step out of the normal current of our lives and to remember who Jesus is, to remember his kingdom, to anchor ourselves in him, his reality, his truth.
I really like that thought. Like the thought of doing these practices to take ourselves out of right what's going on right now, like to avoid getting caught up in the busyness. And I think Jesus even talks about, right, don't worry about tomorrow. For each day has its own worries. It's like, well, how do you stop worrying? Take yourself out of it for a moment and recenter on Christ. So then I guess the next question that I have is like, how have you seen these, I suppose we could even call them spiritual disciplines, right? How have you seen these disciplines like play out in your faith and in the faith of others who've like taken the time to begin practicing them?
Well, I mean, these practices definitely have shaped my heart in different ways. Like giving just teaches me to like let go. It teaches me to not be so like focused on my own budget, my own desires first, right? It teaches me, like, give the first fruits of what I have to the Lord. Like, too often people, when they think about giving, they do their budget first and think, oh, well, whatever I have left over, maybe from that I can give. But like God says to give of our first fruits. And for me, like, that's helped shape my attitude even towards what I have, because ultimately what I have is not my own, it's from the Lord. Because really, all these practices like shape our hearts. So giving, it shaped my heart to really recognize that what I have is not mine. Prayer really, like is shaped me. I mean, can't even say how much it shaped my life, but prayer obviously is so foundational to how I want to like live my life, because I want to live my life under like God's care and just be in conversation with him. And particularly the way to just the ability to just pray with God throughout the day has really shaped me in a lot of ways, just to recognize that I can at any moment step away from what's going on in my life. I'm driving home, I'm stressed. I can just like turn off my podcast that I love and I can just pray and just be with God in that moment. And so that's really helped me to be able to like let go of my own fears and worries and just allow like God's presence to calm my own like nerves and such. And fasting, as much as painful it is, it's taught me so many things. Like fasting, particularly over the Easter season is a time we do a lot of fasting, or in other times. So it stretches me to recognize that the Lord is more important than even like food, even my own energy, because I get weary, I get tired when I fast. But it teaches me that Jesus is better.
So then I guess to close, or like to start wrapping up, like one of the thoughts, right, like as Jesus would say, right, do these things in secret so that your reward is from your heavenly Father, not from man. But there is a very real temptation, right, to even maybe it starts off with the right intent, like I'm doing this for God, but then over time you slowly become more and more calloused, and you find like maybe like 6 months, a year down the line, you're like, wait, hold on, am I doing this for God, or am I doing this for like some show, for some display of religiosity? So how would you advise us to defend against that, to be aware of when we're slipping into those things, and how to approach the practices if we find ourselves in the midst of this like sort of self-righteousness? Well, I think self-righteousness seeps in when we get comfortable
with how we're doing these practices. Because when you're uncomfortable, you're not going to feel very self-righteous. You're going to feel like a little like uneasy because you're pushed more than what's just what you are comfortable doing. And so if we want to fight against the temptation of self-righteousness, we actually have to keep growing in these things, right? Stretching ourselves more than what's comfortable. Because if we allow comfort to settle in, then maybe we're only doing those things because either they're just like a habit, they're just sort of part of our normal flow of our lives, or maybe there's a self-righteousness, we feel better about ourselves. And so if we find ourselves falling into that, just going with the flow, I would say maybe it's time for us to push ourselves a little more, maybe give more than you were before. Maybe our budgets now have normalized, stabilized, and we're like, oh, I know that I'm giving this out, but now you're comfortable. Like, I don't think we should only give to the point where we're comfortable. Like, maybe give a little bit more. Maybe we've grown comfortable with the amount of time we're praying. Maybe it's time to push ourselves to pray more, or pray, maybe wake up earlier, pray earlier, get away from the world, pray extended period of time. Maybe God is saying, go for like a prayer retreat, get a step aside, take a day off from work, go pray for a day. Maybe fast more regularly. Because again, like when we get comfortable doing those things, that's when the self-righteousness kicks in. So if we want to prevent that from happening, we have to stretch ourselves a little more. Because really, the heart, again, to go back to the beginning, growing trust. We grow in our trust, and that means we should also grow in how we do these practices.
I like that thought. Yeah, comfort is really. I feel like it's like one of the things that like humans have always sought after, but like in our culture, in our society, it's very attainable, which is very it's a very interesting thought, P-Dog. Well. Thank you for sharing your thoughts.
Of course.
They were very, very helpful, very insightful, and I appreciate them a lot, as I'm sure a lot of you appreciate them as well. This episode of Grace Covenant Chats was again brought to you by Grace Covenant Church here in Philadelphia. You can go check us out at ucity.gracecovenant.net and join us on Sundays for service in Meyerson for the rest of this semester. Yes, as we're going through the miracles of Jesus. And whoa, I always forget if I have an outro, and I'm like, I don't have an outro. This is my YouTube channel.
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah. So yes, until next time, everybody, have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you next time.